there are women that I know who have considered leaving the industry because that stresses them out and they find that quite difficult. And so it's really about coaching women to realize that a lot of the time when someone's coming across as confident, they aren't necessarily as confident as they're making out. It's just a lot of the time it's an act, and that it's okay to realize that that's an act and to pick holes in it if you don't necessarily agree with it.
Welcome to the Exponential Growth Podcast, where we demystify what it takes to break into tech. I'm your host, James Hudnall, and my goal is to highlight real-life examples of people with non-traditional backgrounds moving into careers they love, so you can too. Hey everyone, today I'm joined by Jade Wilson, a software engineer 2 at Microsoft. Jade, I'm excited to learn what exactly that means and also to learn more about you and your journey into tech. So welcome to Exponential Growth. Please maybe introduce yourself.
Hi, James, and thank you for inviting me to be on your podcast. So, my name's Jade Wilson, and as James said, I work for Microsoft as a software engineer too. A little bit of background around me, I guess. I grew up in a city called Hull. So, most people aren't probably aware of that if they aren't from the UK, but it's a little city in Yorkshire, which is around northeast of the UK, about 4 hours from London.
Okay.
And people in the UK will probably say it's not the best place to live, but I love it. It's my home and it's the best to me. And yeah, so I grew up, my mum was minimum wage worker all her life. My dad, unfortunately, wasn't able to work due to some health problems. So I kind of got into tech in a really odd way, not necessarily odd, but an unusual way of I didn't really have an interest in going to university when I was young until around, like, I guess you would classify it as middle school in America, but here it's called year 10 and year 11. And so before then, I just kind of messed about a lot in school, thought I was funny for being cocky and things like that. And I kind of got away with it because I could mess about a little bit and still do well, like grades wise, because I just was naturally good at doing things like maths. And then I got to year 10, and that's when I had to kind of make the decision of whether I was going to do something that was meaningful and progress my life, or if I was just going to keep messing about in school. And that was the wake-up call for me, knowing actually I can't just keep messing about because it's actually starting to get a little bit challenging. And from then is when I started to actually apply myself and think, okay, now I need to do well. I need to put effort into my studies for maths and also for IT at the time. So I did this course called IT Diploma, and it basically allowed you to do quite a big chunk of learning regarding IT. It wasn't really coding, so it was more to do with like IT project management. You built very, very basic like websites, but you wasn't really doing any code to build those websites. It was using something that had it like UI front.
Okay.
And then you briefly learned about networking, but not a lot. And that was my first introduction to IT. And then
Okay, can I ask you?
Yeah.
It was year 10 in school. Was it the school that asked you, the students, to kind of figure out what you wanted to do, or was this a self-realization that you had?
Yeah, so usually the way that like high schools in the UK are laid out is you've got like year 7 to 9 where you're just doing learning, and then in years 10 and 11, that's when the work that you're doing actually counts towards your grades. And
Okay.
so you'd have these things called GCSEs, and in GCSEs, they basically determine whether or not you can get into college, which is like the equivalent of high school, I think, for you guys. And so if you don't get good GCSEs, then you can't do the subjects that you want to do in college. And so for me, it was a self-realization of, okay, if I don't do well in these subjects that I want to do, I'm not going to be able to go to college and then eventually university. So that was me realizing that I was not going to be able to pass my GCSEs without actually applying myself and then going to college.
Well, good you had that realization then. It took me like until I was 30 until I had that realization or thereabouts. So kudos to you for not taking that long. And so I don't know if you spoke to it explicitly. Why IT as opposed to something else?
So Not necessarily IT initially. I did IT as a subject in school, but I didn't realize I wanted to do IT as a career until university. I actually initially decided to study maths. So I did maths in college and I did further maths in college, and I also did IT as a subject in college. But then I chose to do mathematics at university just because I was naturally better at it. And then I got to university and I really, really didn't like it because I think the biggest difference when you're doing maths at like high school, I guess I keep getting the terminology like mixed up because it's different here versus
Yeah.
in the US. But the difference, what I found here was that in university, it was a lot more about the theory of it rather than the application of it. And when actually, if you think about computer science, a lot of it is about applying logic and figuring things out in a logical way. And
Right.
so before I chose computer science, it took me a few months to consider switching. And it was actually due to my partner at the time who was studying computer science. And I thought that because I hadn't learned a programming language any before, that I wouldn't be able to do it. Because I thought people who do computer science only do it because they've done programming since they were like 10. And, my partner at the time was an example of that because he'd been programming since he was 10. And I touched HTML like once or twice. And so I was a bit apprehensive of doing it, and I was considering actually doing psychology or IT instead of mathematics when I was thinking of switching. But no, he said no, why not do computer science? It's basically IT with maths. And I was like, oh, okay.
It's a good combination based on your
Um,
interests.
and so then that's when I decided to go ahead and go for it. And I'm actually really thankful that my partner at the time encouraged me to do that because I don't think I would have had the confidence to do that had he not.
Real quick sidebar, why psychology? Are you just interested in the way that people think?
Yeah, so I think humans aren't as easily predictable as machines, or think people have their own thoughts, their own feelings, and they want to be communicated with in a certain way, and everyone has different interests and has different likes and different needs. And I think it's really fascinating to me to try and figure out how to get the best out of people. And so I think that's one of the main reasons why I wanted to do psychology, because I wanted to understand people more, understand how to help them more, how to be better in that way, I guess.
Okay. No, that makes sense. So you're all in with computer science. Is that the degree that you eventually got in
Yes.
college? Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So,
And yeah, you want to maybe talk about that experience. And I think so in the US, Jade, you're supposed to, I believe, when you're in college, you're supposed to do an internship, maybe your junior, senior year, if not before. I did not do that, so I can't really speak to that. How does that work in the UK, and maybe more specifically, how did that play out for you?
so in the UK, there's not a requirement that you have to do an internship. I did a summer internship personally because they do say you can do one. You can also do these things that are called UN industries, which are like a year-long internship, and you would generally do that between year two and year three. So in
Okay.
the UK, you have 3 year degrees. I think in the US it's 4. Is that
Yes.
right? So we have 3 year degrees, and then you can choose whether or not you want to do a master's as well, which can be another 1 to 2 years. But I just did 3 years because I had only done a year of maths, so I couldn't do another year funded. So I did 3 years of computer science and I did a summer internship. And then my degree, I focused predominantly on Python in the first year. Quickly moved away from that because it just wasn't something that I enjoyed doing. And then I did C++ and Java in my other 2 years and in my internship, and then subsequently afterwards, I've predominantly done C sharp.
What did you not like about Python? I have to ask. You're the first person I've ever heard that has said that.
It's not necessarily that I think it's not really Python that's the problem, I guess, but a lot of times when I've picked up working with Python, it's been on a project that like is already like a brownfield project. And whenever I've had to go into it, there's always been problems because it just allows you to do things that, other languages would stop you being able to do because it's dynamically typed. So it's just really frustrating when you're like trying to debug something in Python. It just lets you do this thing. I'm just like, oh God.
Okay, fair enough. It was my first language. It's not one that I use at LinkedIn, so I was just curious as to the disdain for Python. But yeah, I get that.
What
So maybe
do you like
go ahead.
Python then?
I do. I still, so I guess my side projects, I do dabble in Python as opposed to other stuff. I also like Scala. I'm not sure if you've ever worked with Scala. It seems like a much more Pythonic derivative of Java. Like it's very similar to Java. They interoperate very well together. And I guess that's been my middle ground. I've probably dealt 95% with Scala since I've been at LinkedIn. So yeah, I see that as the Python that I've got to continue writing of sorts.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I think it's great for like getting up and running. I think for people who aren't necessarily programmers but want to program, I think it's great to learn as well with Python.
Yeah.
It's just something I've never really got on with that well. I do like the testing in Python though. I think it's really nice to the way that the testing works in VS Code. It
Yeah.
debugs really nicely.
Yeah. Let me ask you about maybe your first tech job or leaning into this. Maybe you had more of a traditional background, but I imagine there might have still been some trials and tribulations. Were there any hardships or any, yeah, I guess hardships leading into your first tech job? Anything that you had to work through?
I think my biggest hardships really were both the getting to university and then having a 1-year-old daughter when I started my first job in London.
Okay.
So getting to university was hard because I didn't have a lot of money. So when I got to university, I was really fortunate that I could be part of this program that if you got certain grades, you could be given additional funding to go to university. So the way that the UK works is you have the ability to apply for student loan, and depending on your income, uh, depending on your parents' income, you get like so much money. So some I don't know how it works now if it's changed, but at the time you would be able to be like to borrow each year £9,000 for your tuition fees, which was the money that you would pay the university to go there, and then you would get like a maintenance loan and a maintenance grant. And a maintenance loan was something that would be added on to your student loan and you'd have to pay back. And then a maintenance grant would be something that you would be given for free. So I got at the time £3,500 maintenance loan and £3,500 maintenance grant. And on top of that, I also got a grant from the university for which was like the additional like thing that they provided to people who are on low incomes of £3,000 as well. So overall, I had £10,000 to buy my rent, my clothes, my food, and I think a lot of people are quite fortunate in that they have their parents to kind of to help with that. But that was me for the full year on my own. My parents couldn't
Mm.
afford to buy those things. So that was my first challenge. I ended up getting a summer job both years to able to afford that. And then in my final year, my partner was able to work at the time, so he was able to support when I'd had my daughter. And then when I had my daughter, it was fine, but then the biggest challenges, I guess, were the actual costs of childcare when you're actually living in somewhere like London, because not only are you living in somewhere like London, which is quite expensive. I actually lived in somewhere called Dartford, which was just on the outskirts of London, but you're spending around like £1,000 on your renting, and then you're also paying that much towards childcare fees as well. So that
Mm.
were the main challenges, just around money in general.
Yeah.
But it was just one of those things. I think you just have to get really good at budgeting your money, and you don't
Yeah.
really get to go out much, and that was fine. Make sure that we budgeted for our food and things like that, and we made it work. And
Yeah. No, you definitely did. And I guess I still want to pull on that thread because my wife and I had our first, and I guess she's fortunate to be in a position where she can be a full-time homemaker basically
mm,
for our little one. And I just can't imagine like what you had to go through with having the child and being present for them, but also having to kind of split and partition your time into, it sounds like graduating or finishing up university and then moving into that first role. Yeah, that's just incredible that you pulled that off. And I am curious, maybe for the first tech job, like the interview process, I guess moving on to that, like what was your experience like in that regard?
So a few, I had one really bad experience. So I interviewed with a company in London, and it was like a full day interview. I went in the morning, and then I came back in the afternoon, in the evening, and to travel from Leeds to London, it's quite a long trip. It's a good couple of hours to get there, and it does cost a good 50 £60, which was a lot of money to me at the time, and is a lot of money to some people at the moment still. And I expressed that I really care about my family, and I really care about my daughter in my interview, and it was just something that was really important to me, a big part of my life. And I remember receiving like a call from the recruiter a few days after at the interview, saying that the hiring people who had been there on the day had got the impression that I might want to have another child in a few years, so that they won't be progressing with me. And
Wow.
it was the
Is that
first time.
illegal? Can they do that?
It's not
Okay.
legal at all, but th what
Yeah,
can you
how
do?
are you going to fight it? No,
How
yeah,
am I going to
yeah,
fight that? It's
yeah.
I'm not recording random phone calls to me, but I was just like kind of taken aback. I was just like, you can't say that. That was the first kind of real experience of uh
Wow.
like discrimination, I guess, for
Yeah.
people who have children and who are female in the working environment. I've had like a few little comments here and there about people assuming that I'm a tester or a QA, which fine. I think that's just a like population thing. You don't have as many female engineers, so people just put stereotypes there. But yeah, this felt like proper
Yeah,
discrimination.
no, I disagree with even that. Some of the smartest professionals, programmers that I know are female. So that's incredible in a bad way, like all the way around. And yeah, so I'm curious how you dealt with that at the time, and did that influence future interviews that you had? Like, did you feel like you had to hold back more going into those?
I do feel like I am a lot more reserved since that about talking about my family and talking about that part of me. I generally do keep myself to myself at the moment, and I have done over the past 6 years. I've never really made a connection to it, but I do feel like I don't talk about like
Yeah,
personal life as much. So maybe there is a connection.
yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense. I mean, that's so terrible that you had to go through that. But I mean, I would say look at you now, and I would also say it's easy for us to Monday morning quarterback it looking back, but I assume the silver lining was you probably didn't want to work at a company with that culture anyway. So in a way, maybe it was a gift, even if it didn't feel like one at the time.
Yeah, yeah, that was what I was thinking. I was thinking day in, day out, like work, work, work type culture. And it was a finance company, and I do feel like there was a big like reputation for fintech in the London like space, that they
Yeah,
do really focus on work, late nights and things like that. Maybe it's better now, but at the time I think that was the impression I got.
yeah. Any other interview stories? If nothing else, maybe we jump to the first successful one where you landed that role.
None that I felt like I've been discriminated against. I think there's been a few where I think, they've been really uncomfortable in that. Like I've had like one before where I went there and I didn't know something, and I just went, I don't know what that means. And they just kind of stared at me and moved on. And I was like, are you able to explain to me what that means?
Yeah.
And it just the entire interview was a bit like that, where
Wow.
if I didn't know something that they'd asked me, I said I don't know, and they just kind of stopped. And I thought that was a bit of an uncomfortable interview, because I think
Yeah.
to me it doesn't feel like a very growth mindset, and that's what's really important to me. It's not necessarily important about what someone knows at the time. It's about how do they get to the answer. And my brain doesn't work in a way that I retain a lot of information, because I know that the skills that I have is that I can find information really quickly. And so interviews where I'm asked things about common not like knowledge, I'm never going to do well in, never going to perform because I'm really bad at remembering stuff like that. Like, never be with me on a trivia quiz because you will lose. Or I will
Okay.
like not participate. I will not do very well. Quizzes I am really bad at just because I just don't retain anything that I think I can find out easily.
Unless you have your laptop, and then we can look up the answer. I feel like,
Yeah.
to your point, I mean, I guess I can't speak to your day to day, but maybe you can corroborate this. Where there's a lot of things every day, Jade, that I don't know at work that I'm trying to figure out. And I think the most important skill that I've learned is learning how to learn. And to your point, learning how to ask questions if you need to, but also to do either the Google search, Stack Overflow, ChatGPT, whatever derivative it is, but to be able to learn how to learn and find how to get unstuck. And I feel like that skill is so much more valuable than just rote memorization. Obviously, I'm biased because I feel like I tend more to the former scenario, but I'm curious, like your day to day now at Microsoft, I'm sure you're looking up things, and I'm sure you're not the only one. I feel like we all do that.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if this is common in every industry, but the industry that I work in is quite common that you have to learn things all the time because we're genuinely working with customers where we have to learn what they are working on. So we typically work in 3 to 6 month projects. We work with customers to help them achieve a goal. So they might have a goal that they want to build something or they want to move something to the cloud in a certain way, and we need to help them do that. And so a lot of the time we go in, we see what skills that they have in their teams, and we work with them on their skills. And so recently we worked on React and Python, and then at the moment we're currently working on C Sharp, which I'm really happy about because I love C Sharp. But the biggest thing that we need to be able to do is move with the technology because a lot of the time we're suggesting to use the like latest versions of things. We don't want to be using like .NET 3, .NET Core 3.1, and for example, we want to be using .NET 7 and ideally .NET 8 when it's out. And so it's always about moving fast. But the thing about moving fast is I don't know how you can learn everything because everything's moving so quickly at the moment. I hadn't touched .NET in like a year, like at work, and I go back to it and I'm like, oh my God, there's all these changes that have happened even. And so for me, it feels pointless, like retaining loads and loads of information at once when I know that in a few months the information that I learn is going to be outdated again. And so it's all about learning what I need to learn at the time,
Yeah.
and then but syntax and things, I think is usually quite easy to retain, but like how to do like specific things that you can easily find, that just feels
Right.
pointless to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, to your point, I still feel like personally, and based on what you just described, and I find myself in this predicament where, as a LinkedIn Reach apprentice, I'm given 20% of my week just to dedicate to rote learning, however that best benefits me in my role. And I'm still quite torn, but lately I've trended more towards like the meta learning, like learning how to learn, getting better at prompt engineering, better at researching different things. Because initially it was probably 100% learn Java, learn Scala, figure out exactly what I need to know. And even if those languages don't change that much, I feel like the scope of what my team does is changing so much, especially the past year with generative AI. And I can't join a meeting now where AI isn't used in some capacity. So it's almost like, okay, I can keep playing this catch-up game, or I can try to see where the puck is headed and then try to start learning in that direction. And hopefully by learning those skills, I'll be able to backfill where I need to. I feel like that's worked fairly well for me. And I almost feel like you have to start at least thinking that way, just because, to your point, the velocity at which things are changing. And I don't feel like that's going to slow down in the future.
No, I think it's just increasing as more and more engineers come into the space. I think as well, like you can do so much more. Like I don't know if you have GitHub Copilot, but at
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft we're very lucky that we get to use it as part of our job, and it just makes things so much quicker. Like writing tests, just take so much quicker than it used to be. It just generates most of it for you. You can change a few things when you need to. Same with like once you started like adding some boilerplate, it can automatically, detect the rest of it for you. And
Yeah.
so, and just writing like comments and things like that, oh, I want to do this thing, and then it knows what you want to do. And it's just things like that just make things so much easier day and day. And I really enjoy using Copilot. It's one of my favorite things. I just moved back to Visual Studio because I was using VS Code for a while because I was working on React and Python, and I just think you don't necessarily need Visual Studio for that. But because we're working with a solution, I decided to go back to Visual Studio for .NET, and I found out that you can also use the extension for that. So that's been good.
Nice. Bring that with you. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Now, we've danced around it a little bit. Well, was that first role Microsoft, or was that a role that would come later down the line?
No, so I have been working in the industry for 7 years before I got to Microsoft, and I wasn't actually looking when I got hired at Microsoft.
Tell us more.
So I, it always happens to me, but when I got approached for Microsoft, I was pregnant at the time with my second baby, my baby boy, and I was leading a team of developers at a company called Tap at the time, and we were working on a product that had RFID technology. So I don't know if you've ever been to an event where you get a wristband and you get to pay things on that with that wristband.
I've heard of them. I haven't been to one myself, though. I don't get
So
out much, Jade, but I know what you're talking about.
so it was basically working on technology for that to support the integration of that with things like these RFID devices that allowed you to scan the tags to take money off them, buy products and things like that. And so I wasn't looking to move. I was 16, 17 weeks pregnant at the time, and I got a random message from a recruiter at LinkedIn on LinkedIn for Microsoft, and they were saying Microsoft are hiring. Your skill set was particularly of interest to us. It'd be great to chat. So we had a phone call because I said to him initially that I would absolutely love to work for Microsoft. It's, my dream company, but I'm currently pregnant, so not currently looking. And then he was like, well, we don't really consider that as a thing, so if you would still want to apply, we encourage it.
How
And
different is
so,
that from that first interview process you had?
yeah, completely different, and
Right.
it was great. And so I thought, you know what, probably not going to get this, but I might as well go for it. These opportunities don't come up very often. And so had a call with a recruiter who was great. He said that they were looking for someone who had software development skills, but also solutions architecture skills as well. And I'd just done my Azure Solutions Architect certification, so I think that helped. And so he put me forward. Didn't hear anything for a couple of weeks. I didn't think I'd got anything, and then I got another call in June to say, we'd like to progress you for an interview. I had my first initial one-to-one chat with my boss, who I have now, and he just told me a little bit about the company, the department, and what they do, and whether I'd be interested. And it was really funny because it actually was like the perfect kind of industry for me because it's something that is fast paced and continuously moving. And for me, I am someone who likes to learn a lot of things. I like to continue to be learning new technologies. And so it was perfect because, you get to learn something new every 3 to 6 months because you're always switching to new customers and working on new things. So yeah, I was like, no, great, I'd love to progress. And then I had a 1 day interview, but with like four interviews
4
inside of
parts.
it. Yeah.
Okay.
And so there's like a technical, there's the like coding interview, there was the competency interview, which is like where they ask you like scenario based questions, and then there was an architecture style interview, and then there was like a final interview. And yeah, it was really great. And then I got the offer
Hold on
from
now.
Microsoft.
I got a question about that.
Yeah.
So, in those 4 interviews you had mentioned earlier where you don't feel like you're that great on the spot, or at least that's what I thought I heard. How was that with the Microsoft, like rote memorization? Did you have like a leak code style toy problem? Did you knock that out of the park, or how did that go?
So it's not that I don't do well with things on the spot. is that I don't do well with knowledge-based things that assume that you already know the answer to something. If I'm able to like deduce the answer, then I can learn
Okay.
it. So the interview that I had at the time, and the interview process does change quite often, is the actual coding interview was a pair programming interview. So I was giving a brief of what I needed to do, and then I got asked to do it in the programming language of my choice. And so I was working with one of their like senior lead engineers to deliver this requirement that they'd asked me to do, and it was just like in an API like an API requirement. And yeah, that went really well. And then the architecture one was more understanding about the like different like what systems that I'd helped like architect and build. So that was all very like they do a lot of prompt questioning in Microsoft when they do interviews, and this is all to determine actually, okay, well, it's about assuming that like just because the person that you're interviewing doesn't know exactly what you know doesn't mean that they don't know like of value. So they'll ask questions about to try and deduce like have you can you provide an example of when you like architected a solution from scratch, and then they'll ask you about and then you'll talk about like how you architected something, and then they'll ask you based on that, okay, well, can you dig a little bit more into how you use Kubernetes to do that? And so
Okay.
it's all about like figuring out from the questions that they answer whether or not they that you've shown that you've got the skill. It's very much about finding evidence rather than finding reasons not to hire someone.
That makes sense. So you knocked it out of the park. You got the offer. What was that like? And as a follow up, because I'm always curious, did you negotiate at all if you're comfortable discussing?
It was amazing. I did not negotiate, but I did get a 25% pay rise. And as well as that, I also got another 15% pay rise if I, another like 15 to 20% pay rise if I included my stock options and my bonus.
Hmm.
So,
Congratulations. That's
um,
nice. That's a nice
so I
bump.
wasn't, I wasn't gonna, at the time, I was like, I was working at my dream company. I was getting significantly more money, and the way that Microsoft gives you like pay offers is they compare your like what you're currently getting to the rest of the market, and then they offer based on that. So you can actually go to like Microsoft and say, what's my comp ratio to other people? And so you can make sure that you're getting paid very fairly. So they are
Yeah.
like very good at making sure that people are paid in a fair way to the market rate.
Yeah. No, that's great to hear. I think LinkedIn is the same way, although I haven't had those conversations yet, but I do believe that we are the same. I'm curious. So you mentioned that you were pregnant during this time, and it sounded like Microsoft was going to be supportive. Did they end up being supportive as you
Yes, yeah,
transitioned?
yeah. So I started pretty much 8 weeks before I was due to have my little boy. The waiting process from getting the offer to actually getting into the door is quite long. It was like 10 weeks, I think,
Okay.
because they have to do a lot of background checks. They have to do like onboarding and set up for the onboarding and things like that, and that just takes time. So I was kind of waiting for like a month to make sure all my background checks and stuff went through before I could actually hand in my notice. Because it's
Yep.
like, well, we won't give you your contract until this happens. And I think it's just the nature of how big the company is that it just takes some time. And so I was waiting for a while to get my contract and to tell my boss. And I told my boss, like my boss was just about to go away as I just about to get my contract, and I was just like, I'm gonna have to tell him now.
Yeah.
Um, and he was like, I think he was a bit sad, like I was leaving, but he was like completely got it because he would have done the same, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, Microsoft were great, and I actually got a better maternity package from leaving and going to Microsoft than I would have if I'd have stayed at my current company
Hmm.
at the time, because Microsoft I really had a really really good maternity package for their staff, even if you're a new starter, which is really
Do you mind
nice.
sharing what that is? I know what LinkedIn is. LinkedIn, I
Um,
think, is 3 months, either father or mother.
so at the time, and I don't know what the case is now, at the time I got 20 weeks full
Okay.
pay. I think it's probably similar to LinkedIn for males on paternity or
Okay.
anyone who's on paternity.
Yeah. Well, I imagine
Um,
there's probably some nuance and difference between the countries as well, or regulatory. I'm not sure, but either way, that's very generous, like you said. And so you felt supported. You had that time off after you got back to work, where you're still, I assume, like really new to this role. How was it getting back into the habit and maybe establishing this habit with Microsoft?
it felt very, very easy. I think it felt like I've never left. I guess you would say
Really?
it, like because the team, like we just became a really, really good team, and we work quite well together. And I feel like because of the skill set that I have, in that I can just, get up and running quite quickly based on the tools that I have, it just I could go and I could come back and I could start contributing value very quickly. And so from that point of view, settling in was quite easy. The biggest challenge that I have is just that I am quite far away to the office in comparison to some of the team, and so I do get to miss out on a few of the team meetings because they often go to the office every Wednesday or Thursday, and I only go like once a month. So that's the biggest difference that we have. But yeah, it's not too much. It's still like I'm used to it. Like I've been pretty much working remotely since COVID happened, and so it's kind of the norm now.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. But I still want to ask as a follow up question, what do you think are the biggest struggles that you've seen, or maybe that you've had personally working remote?
The biggest challenges that I have working remote is I quite like being around people, and I quite like, especially when it's like to do with meetings and things like that. I much prefer in-person meetings than screen meetings. It's much easier to keep engaged. It's much easier to like get to the root of the problem because everyone's actually like paying attention. I think the challenges you have when you have remote work is you have a few people who are talking and then everyone else that's just in the background and not contributing as much as they would necessarily contribute if they were in person. And so you've got the loudmouths like myself who will just keep talking and there's no way of reading the room to interject when someone who isn't necessarily is spoken to know when to start speaking. And I think they're quite challenging. And you've got things like the raising of the hand, but it's not a natural way to like interject into a conversation, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whereas I think in person it's a lot easier to tell when you can like speak like when other people are around you.
I love, to your point, I love the hand icon idea. And what I find is we use Teams a lot, and maybe it's not half the time, but maybe 30% of the time, whoever is talking might be dialing in from a conference room and actually doesn't see all of the icons. So they can't necessarily tell if someone has that hand up for whatever reason. So then someone will say, hey, so and so has their hand up. So to your point, it's additional friction that probably leads to people being less likely to use that feature. Although I am glad, I guess we're trying to work through that, given the fact that, to your point, so much work is remote these days.
Yeah, and I think another thing that I find that is quite difficult to replace is just the ability to collaborate and write something down. I think it's a lot easier to like draw things when you've got a board in front of you and you've got a whiteboard and you can draw it. I'm quite interested to see if there's a tool out there that makes it as easy to do that online. I've not come
Hmm.
across one yet. I think there was Teams whiteboard, but that just is really flaky. But yeah, it's quite a challenge, I think, when you're trying to
Yeah.
design something and architect something out.
Contrasting Microsoft to, I'm not sure if it was a startup that you were working at before, but it was probably smaller than Microsoft. What were the biggest differences you saw, and maybe what was the biggest surprise moving from the small to the big?
So my previous place was a startup, and then a couple of the places before that were like medium-sized businesses and small businesses. And so I've never worked in like the scale size of Microsoft as a like complete software like house. And the biggest difference that I've seen, at least here, is everything is a lot more relaxed. Not in a bad way. So when I was at Tap, Tappet, you would need to deliver features that were that needed to be done yesterday, basically. And so you would be working like day in, day in, day out to get this feature done. And you wouldn't necessarily have done it in the best way. You would have to do it knowingly with technical debt because you needed to get this feature live in like a week. And that wasn't a very nice culture to be in at the time. It was quite stressful. And it wasn't a fault of the engineering department. It was just a fault of, okay, we're in a startup, and startup, this is how startups make their money sometimes. And so you was always like constantly chasing your tail of, okay, this is what needs done to do this feature. And if you didn't do that, then you'd kind of just be side gated. So I went away to America for like 5 days because we were doing an event in America. And I came back and all of these changes had happened within that because we needed to deliver this new feature. And I was just like, whoa, what the heck has just happened here? But you just had to kind of get on board with it, basically. And there was only so much I felt like I could do to protect the team without basically being side gated.
Yeah.
And so that culture there versus the culture of Microsoft, which is a lot more relaxed, like a lot more healthy work-life balance. I, didn't need to work any weekends. I didn't need to do anything like that. Was really refreshing. I've always worked at places where everything is, on fire or everything's a crisis, and you don't really have that at Microsoft. Everything's you do have like things that you need to deal with, and there are priorities and things like that, but you don't have like on fire,
Yeah.
fix this for me, like yesterday kind of push from the sales teams.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So we had talked earlier about some of the challenges of being a female in the industry that we're in. And I guess, what do you think could be done to bridge that gap?
I think the biggest thing that we need to do as females, I guess, is to continue being assertive and strong. One thing that I really struggled with when I got into the industry was I was really intimidated by the voices in the room. I don't know if this is a common thing, but like at least from my experience and from experiences of females that I've spoken to, men tend to be quite confident in the way that they speak, in the way that they like articulate their words. And as a female, you can have a lot of self-doubt and a lot of lack of confidence when it comes to that. And so there are women that I know who have considered leaving the industry because that stresses them out and they find that quite difficult. And so it's really about coaching women to realise that a lot of the time when someone's coming across as confident, they aren't necessarily as confident as they're making out. It's just a lot of the time it's an act, and that it's okay to realise that that's an act and to pick holes in it if you don't necessarily agree with it. And so making women realise that is quite a big thing and a big challenge. And it takes time because you can't just go from having this sort of like mindset to this mindset overnight. But you can gradually do it as you continue to stay in the industry. And it's all about providing the appropriate support for that and just saying, okay, being that support network for women who are having those challenges and are having those struggles. The other thing is, again, from experience that I've noticed is that there's a lot of like fear that I think women carry with them when it comes to being wrong. And so a lot of the time they feel quite scared to make changes, to do things, and will end up with the inability to like make progress on something because they're so scared of getting it wrong. And I think it's about, okay, encouraging them to realise, actually, no, get some thinking and then we can see where you've gone wrong, see what progress you can make, and we can improve on it rather than having a blank slate of nothing that can be worked upon. And then the last thing is, and this is something that I've not done yet, but I'm doing in the upcoming weeks, is just I'm trying to speak to people at a younger level So I'm going to my local college to do an open day to talk about what it's like working at Microsoft. So I'm doing that next Tuesday actually. And so that's all about just trying to make sure people who aren't necessarily in the industry yet are thinking about, okay, could this be the role for me? Because I think, again, based on what I've seen, I think a lot of people think that you have to have been programming before you get to university to actually consider computer science as a career path. And that's not true. And I think it's just about making people realize that and encouraging that.
Changing topics, Jade, can you tell us a little bit about a day in the life of as a Microsoft developer? And I'm also curious, I think you're a level 2 developer, and I know different companies have different levels, so I would love to learn more about that as well.
So, day in the life for me is I wake up, I'm a remote worker, so I generally get up, get sorted, and take my daughter to school, and I take my son to nursery, and then I come back home. So it's kind of like a round trip of dropping them off and then coming back home. And so I pretty much work at home the majority of the time. Like once a month, I might go into the office, like if there's something that's occurring, but usually it's working from home. And then it really just depends on the day. So I have days where I dedicate to doing like admin in the morning, and then other days where I'm just completely focused on writing code. It really depends on like the time of the week. And so Wednesdays, for example, are our days where we do like planning for the week ahead. So we work kind of like loosely Scrum Kanban like style in my team. So we would generally just pick up like the highest priority tickets, but every week we still have a retrospective. We still like plan what we're going to be doing in the next week, and then we also like showcase the work that we've done so far. So at the moment, when I do write code, it's in C Sharp and .NET at the moment, and so that's been really fun because I really like writing in C Sharp and .NET. It's my favorite language to work with, and so yeah, I just generally either go back to the task that I was working on the next day, or I pick up the next thing that next ticket that I've got. Yeah, it's a lot of it's working on your own. I'm not gonna lie, like I think there's a lot of design discussions and stuff that you have as a development team, but like doing the actual writing, the coding, I do a lot of that on my own here. Which
Can I
is,
ask you,
yeah.
how do you get yourself unstuck as a remote employee if you find yourself, spinning your wheels for an hour or 2 hours? What do you do?
So I have like a process of what I follow. If it's an issue where I need to debug something, I'll try and write a test for the issue that I've got. So just say I'm struggling with certain data that's on the web page, and I'm running the website, and it's like throwing an error. I will write a test for this particular test case of, okay, it's saying that like when a user doesn't have this field that it's thrown an exception. I'll write that, replicate it within the test, and then I will then set breakpoints into the areas of the code that I have just to see where that issue is occurring. And then I will determine whether it's on the front end or the back end. I will determine like the what the expected behavior should be, and then that's pretty much how I debug it I think it's a bug. When I think it's an issue that isn't is configuration or it's networking, a lot of the time I post into, so we use Teams at Microsoft, of course. um, and I will say, because we work with customers a lot, we are working on their systems. So a lot of the time, like the networking is controlled by someone over there. So we generally just post on the chat to say, okay, I'm having this issue. These are the things that I've tried. There was an issue the other day, for example, where we couldn't connect to their NuGet packages provider. So the way that it works is that they have their own private NuGet repository, and you can log into that and you can create like credentials for it, and then you can put them locally. And so I was just saying, okay, when I do this, when I log in with my basic credentials, I'm able to log in, but when I use the token that they've provided me, I can't use that, and I'm not able to log in. And it's just all about gathering evidence of the things that I have tried, like determining whether it's an environment issue or whether it's a local issue. So for example, I tried doing it on my machine, and then I also tried doing it within a Docker Compose file. I was getting the same issue with both like approaches. And so she's saying, okay, so I can show you that this isn't just localized to my machine. I'm having it in multiple different ways. And that's the kind of approach that I take to try and get as much information to the people that can help me as well, just so that they can then determine the issue too.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I've heard that before, Jade, and I just want to highlight that point for the audience. To those out there listening, if you have a problem and you're trying to get unstuck, I heard Jade say where she laid out what she had tried, the behavior she was observing, and then basically offloading everything that she knew and had tried to the people that she's trying to get to help her get unstuck. And I've tried to do the same thing when I try to get unstuck as a remote employee, even if that's just, talking with my team in Slack. It's not just, hey, I'm stuck, I don't know what to do here. It's just like you said, it's I've tried XYZ, this is what I'm observing, this is what I think about it. And sometimes it's even, I'm going to proceed, but I wanted to share this here just in case anyone else has an idea. And I know I've had great success in doing that. And I hear it in you, Jade, and I've heard it from a lot of the other guests that we've had in trying to get unstuck.
Yeah, I think one of the most unhelpful things that you can do as a developer is just go, this doesn't work. Because what does that mean? That doesn't really help like me as another person who doesn't know like the context of what you've been doing help you. So it's like when working with developers previously, a lot of that is like trying to like get them to the actual root cause of what the issue is. Of okay, well, can you talk me through what error you're actually experiencing? Is it the same error that I think it is versus what you're saying it is? So it's just like really just getting them to like read the like error that's being presented, question okay what could that error potentially mean, and things like that. It makes a big difference to debugging.
For sure. All right, now the software level 2. Would love to better understand the different levels at Microsoft.
So it's a bit weird. So like I think they're changing it, but like you've got like software engineer 1 and software engineer 2, and then you've got senior, and then you've got principal. But underneath each of them you've got like a level 59, level 60. So software engineer 1's are level 59 and level 60. And then you've got software engineer 2s, which are like level 61 and level 62. And then seniors are like level 63 and level 64. And then above that, it kind of goes like that. But I think they're changing it to IC3 and IC4s to kind of fit the same. I think Google do that, don't they? It seems to be.
I know LinkedIn does.
I think they're trying to change it to that.
Okay.
So I'm a software engineer 2 at level 62. So it's like you've got kind of levels within the level.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it is interesting. I've always found it interesting, the different nuance between the different companies. So it sounds like the next jump for you would be to senior?
Yeah, so I think they put these levels inside of them so that you do have opportunity to like progress without necessarily progressing in title. I assume that's the case. I couldn't confirm it. And yeah, so they're the bands that Microsoft have. And generally, if you want to move up a band, they just kind of like, say that you need to like, they generally give you details of what it is you need to do to be able to achieve those like higher levels. It's not guaranteed though. Obviously, it depends on like whether there's space, whether there's availability, whether especially like for things like principal and stuff like that, where they have like very, very like specific and like singular roles a lot of the time. But yeah, is there anything else that you wanted to know in regards to the like levels?
No, I think that was as clear as it could be, given how convoluted many of these systems are. So I think you did a great job explaining it.
What's LinkedIn's levels like?
Yeah, so LinkedIn actually uses the IC standard. I don't want to call it a standard, but it is like an individual contributor ranking system. And thank you for putting me on the spot. I'm going to do the best I can. I want to say, I'll probably get this wrong. So I'm an apprentice still, and the next level for me is, I believe it's considered a IC2. I could be off by one here. And so the IC2, if I'm getting that right, represents the, I guess, standard SWE level. And then my understanding, I haven't looked too far beyond this, but I think after IC2 comes IC3, which I believe is senior. And then after that, there's a staff, senior staff. And now I'm definitely out of my depths. I don't know if it's principal and then distinguished or vice versa, but yeah, I know for me,
kind of become one at that kind of level, don't they? They're just like, they're all the same level, like 65 to 70. It's like, oh,
right.
I know what that means.
But it is interesting getting to hear different perspectives, even though, LinkedIn falls under the Microsoft umbrella. We have different systems, and that's
Mm.
interesting, I find, in and of itself.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I feel like they are moving towards it though because they've recently started hiring in a few months back, and I did remember like seeing the job description say IC3 and IC4, for example. I
Yeah,
just don't think they've communicated what that kind of like mapping is to when I was hired versus what it is now, if that
yeah,
makes sense.
yeah. I wanted to ask you about Azure Cloud, and this is a little bit of a selfish question, although I feel like the audience might be interested as well. I've started on the weekends learning the
Hmm.
Azure Cloud suite just because being a LinkedIn employee, we have access to that to a certain extent. I think I saw that you had, maybe it's your architect solutions certification.
Hmm.
And I guess the question I have, Jade, is how much do you use, I guess, Azure Cloud on a day to day basis? And maybe if you don't, maybe you do, maybe you don't. How have you seen that grow in your time at Microsoft, maybe to encapsulate, I assume, more of the market share from what we hear?
So I do use it quite a lot. It's the cloud provider that is used for everything that we do. You wouldn't see us using like AWS, for example. You just that it wouldn't make sense for us to use that when we have so many. We have it pretty much available to us to use Azure, and it is a really good offering. I wouldn't say that like since starting versus now that I use it any more than when I started, for example. But that's just because I think we use it in everything we do. We use it we use it for networking. We use it for getting things up and running. We use it for getting things started quickly. What I would say actually is that things are change quite quickly. So, for example, when I started, like it was Azure Active Directory, and now everything's moving to Microsoft Entry, for example. So that you just have to constantly keep learning new things and new about what it does and what it's doing. I think I remember like I redid my certifications like recently, and like the amount of stuff that I had to relearn just for those was quite a lot. Just
Yeah.
because it changes so much and it changes so rapidly. The good thing is I do think the a lot of the documentation that I've used at least is quite good. I think if you learn something like Azure Web Apps, for example, it's quite easy to then learn something like Azure Container Apps because they're quite similar in how they are, they're quite similar in how they flow on the portal. And they have some really nice offerings with like integrating with GitHub and things like that, just because there's a lot of demand for that. I recently did a like integration with Azure Web Apps where I integrated it with one of my local like GitHub repositories on my personal page. It took like 10 minutes. It just to get all that set up, get a build and test pipeline set up and running and connecting to it. So it pretty much provides you the template that you need to like get it up and running in GitHub. So there's a lot of great integrations that are happening at the moment with it. So that's the biggest changes that I've seen. It's just there's better integrations. It just feels like a lot of the things are just getting more like complete as products, which has been really nice. Very similar to like, GitHub Copilot is becoming more established and nice and like
Yeah.
nice to work with. One thing
Yeah.
I always struggled with AWS is I always find it quite difficult to navigate, like because I used to use AWS at my old place. I always found like the console really difficult to navigate, and I think
Hmm.
people might disagree with me, but I've always found like Azure, it was a lot easier and more intuitive to find my way around.
Yeah, no, the Cloud Shell I think is phenomenal in and of itself. And for those unaware, Microsoft has I guess I don't know if it's learn.microsoft, but if you just Google Microsoft Learn, they have phenomenal documentation and phenomenal, I guess, learning paths is what I've been doing for fun on the weekend. And most recently, it's been the AI track that I had a little bit of exposure to this a few years ago when I did like a Udacity machine learning nano degree, but it was so refreshing, Jade, to go through the Microsoft Learn AI fundamentals track. So basic 101 stuff. A lot of it was a refresher, high level concepts, but at the same time, there was a lot of high quality information packed into those modules that I did. And so that kind of leads me to my next question in regards to like generative AI. We all hear about that, ChatGPT, Bing chat. I don't know why that's not more popular because I personally find myself using that more than ChatGPT. But I'm curious how maybe you are leveraging either, ChatGPT or LLMs in general in your day-to-day work, maybe to help you get unstuck? I heard you mention Copilot. Perhaps you're using that as well.
Yeah, so I use Copilot a lot for working with Visual Studio and VS Code. So that's been really, really helpful. What I find it particularly helpful with is writing test cases for me, because what I find is once you've written the first test case, and even when you've put like certain methods within that you want to actually check, it then is able to like quickly identify the things that you also want to verify as well. And so that's been really good for me. It saves me a lot of time. I think test cases can get quite repetitive, so things like that is really useful. It's really useful for like when you've written one test case and then you write another test case, but like change the wording of what you want the test to be. It can pretty much detect what it is you're going to be testing and write the full thing out. Saves a lot of time. And then the other side of it is I use it for like when I create models, not so much sometimes when it starts trying to guess some of the model names, and that can get a little bit annoying, but a lot of the time it's really useful. And then when I'm doing link queries as well, it's quite good for that as well.
Yeah,
Like
I've
if
noticed.
you type what query you want to do,
Yeah, I've
what you
noticed
can say.
personally when I name my methods and classes descriptively, like pretty well, it seems like Copilot is much better at the underlying logic suggestions that they do, which makes sense. And I feel like they're reinforcing good naming behaviors that we should be trying to strive towards anyway. So I've enjoyed that aspect of it.
Yeah, it's really, really good. I think I really notice when I don't have it anymore because I am a lot slower like than when I'm with it when I've got it next to me. That doesn't mean like I just go on with whatever it says, but I a lot of writing code you end up writing a lot of boilerplate, and it just is really good for getting rid of for doing the boilerplate for you. And then ChatGPT, to be fair, I don't use it a lot for coding. I do ask it to explain certain things to me, like if I don't quite understand what something's doing or what something's for, and then I'll be like, can you just explain what this is to me? But I found that like it doesn't churn out code very well. I don't think the code quality is quite there yet, and I think that's predominantly because it's probably trained on a lot of like inconsistent data when it comes to writing code. However, what it is really good at is content writing. So in terms of like documentation for READMEs, it's really good at that. So if you just say, I've got these environment variables that I need to write about, I've got, to explain what this art application that I'm writing is about, it will produce you a really nice README in Markdown. Like if you say, show me the code for this in Markdown, it will give you that, and that's really, really good and really, really useful. It saves me a lot of time. I really don't write. I'm not a massive documentation fan, so I get bored of it and things like that. So that's really helped me produce better documentation quicker.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you had mentioned content creation, which leads me beautifully into the next topic that I wanted to ask you about is you're pretty prolific on not only LinkedIn, but I think I'm not on TikTok, but I think I see you posting TikTok reels that you've done. I'm curious, when did you venture down this content creation path? What was the impetus behind it? I don't know, do you have an end goal in mind, or are you just having fun?
So my predominant content creation at the moment is still LinkedIn. I have like tinkered with like TikTok, but it is a lot of work. It takes a lot of time, and when you've got a job and family and stuff like that, it's been quite a lot. So I haven't been as active on there in the last few weeks. I've been focusing predominantly on LinkedIn. So my aim at the moment, I think, is to focus on growing LinkedIn a bit more, and then I can then venture out to the other channels like I plan to do. One thing I realized when doing my content creation was like the videoing doesn't take that long. It's the editing and the like putting it all together at the end that takes a lot of time. And so I need to figure out a way to become either more efficient at doing that, because spending hours of editing just isn't something that I enjoy doing, or like need to do less, need to think of something, a way of doing it differently. But content creation wise, I have always like been active on LinkedIn, but not like consistently. So I think for the last few years I've been on LinkedIn, and I just kind of post my thoughts, have a rant or whatever over the last like 3 years. And I like naturally kind of just grew a small like following by doing that. And then I got to like July where I thought, okay, I had my baby like a year ago, and then I thought uh, I took a little bit of a break from LinkedIn because to spend time focusing on my son. And then when he was a little bit older, I thought, okay, well, I want to, start applying myself more to LinkedIn. And the biggest reason for that is, and the thing that I want to do is I want to start like trying to encourage more people from like different backgrounds to get into software development. And the reason that's important to me is someone who's grown up with not a lot of things, you don't necessarily realise the world that you could be going into if you like, put yourself forward into something like software development. And I think it's just opened up such a range of opportunities for myself that it'd be great to encourage other people who want to have like the same sort of opportunities in life to go forward with software engineering if they enjoy it and it's something that they want to do. I think a lot of people stop before they start in software engineering. They get in their head, they let other people get into their head, they get intimidated because I think there are a lot of intimidating people. And what I want to do is to try and like encourage people and let them know that it's not as scary as people make it out to be sometimes. It's not as like intimidating, and sometimes people are just, talking a big game, but really it's just a facade.
Yes, I've seen the same. I try to take the opposite stance, and I feel like that's been received fairly well, at least from the messages that I've received, in that I take every opportunity I can find to poke fun at myself and to, I guess, from a sense of humility, but also show the growth over time and to show that it's okay to be in that state and to try to lean into being in that state and to try not to compare, to your point, with people that have been in an industry maybe for 10 plus years and are probably saying a lot of things that maybe they don't actually know what they're talking about. So to not get intimidated by that.
Yeah, I think like, I've seen a few things like where people are like, oh, if you don't do this or if you don't do that, then you should just not be like a software engineer. And I think it's a very like siloed mindset in that, there's a lot of different ways to be a successful software engineer. And I've worked with a lot of engineers that are completely different to each other and have completely different skill sets. And have all been relatively successful in what they're doing because there's such a wide diversity of things that can be done within software engineering. And once you kind of start seeing that, once you stop expecting everyone to be like you and to think in the same way like you, then you kind of see where they can add value and where they can fit within either a team or within a certain area of product development or software development or consulting. It's all just about identifying what their skills are versus yours. I read a book, and I don't read books very often because I'm not a book person, but there's a book that I read a few years back which is called Managing Humans. It's about someone's experience on like working with software engineering teams, and it's a really good book of understanding like different like software engineering different types of software engineers. What you'll find is like a lot of software engineers are quite analytical and quite process driven, but the way that they approach things is quite different. And then reading that book really helped me have empathy for people who didn't necessarily have like the same sort of skill sets as me, but had different skill sets to offer. So sorry, I continue to talk, but I classify like my skill set as being someone who can get things up and running quite quickly. And in this book, that's kind of classed as someone who is like a volatile, I guess you would call it. And then you have something called stabilists as well, who are better at getting the systems very like, thinking of all the different edge cases and thinking of like high level designs and things like that. But what you'll find is if you have like too many of one in one team and too many of one in the other, you end up with not the best type of product because you end up with either something that's a little bit more like unstable. And I wouldn't say that the stuff that I do is unstable because I still really care about testing, but a lot of volatile type from this book, that's the name of the type of developer. I'm not saying that people are volatile, but that's what he identified them as. But a lot of people with that type generally don't do testing as much and get focused more on like getting things up running and quickly. And then you have your stabilists who really care about like, following process and getting things really like well and secure. And then you have like people like me who are a bit more in the middle. You'll find that when you have a mix of those, that's a lot better than if you have one or the other, because if you have a volatile like team, then you'll have quite an unstable product by the end of it, but you'll have like, a product with a lot of rich features. And if you have too many stabilists, then you'll have a product that doesn't have many features at all.
Yeah.
And if you look at things like, ChatGPT, for example, I think this is a great example of that. When it got released, it wasn't necessarily the perfect product to begin with. It had a few bugs, it had a few issues. What it did have was the market at that point, and it continues to have the market because it got there quickly.
Yeah.
And so by having this mixture of people who care about getting things out there and getting out there quickly, and then having these members of your teammates who then can make it all a really good and stable product, really gives you a good balance in development team, I think.
Yeah, no, there's so much wisdom in there. And I think the biggest takeaway for me was things that I've also seen in my both current team and past teams, even in completely different industries. Like back when I was managing the fleet of boats, I noticed that the team that I was on, it wasn't that big, but to your point, we had a very diverse set of people with different strengths and weaknesses. And in hindsight, I feel like most of the success was because of that diverse perspective that each of us brought to that, and to lean into that as opposed to trying to, I guess, conform to whatever you feel like in our industry, what a software engineer should be. And so that book, Managing Humans, I think I'd heard of it. I've never read it, but I definitely want to, because that sounds like a phenomenal framework through which you can maybe better understand the teammates that you have.
Yeah, it's really helped me understand different teammates. It's really helped me understand what it is like that I need to provide different people to make them the most efficient that they can be. Like certain developers might need a bit more requirements and a bit more clarity on what it is you want delivering. Certain types of developers prefer a bit more ambiguity. And when you get to what it is they actually care about and what it is they want to do, then you end up with a lot happier teammates and a lot like better collaboration.
Yeah, it all comes down to empathy in the end. I love it. Well, Jade, are you ready for the hot seat?
Of course, yeah.
All right. First question. What does your typical morning routine look like?
So, brush my teeth, get a shower, me and myself ready, and the kids, take them to school and nursery, and then come home, have breakfast before I start the day.
Love it.
Oh,
If money did,
sorry, I
go ahead.
have a cup of tea before I drive as well. I can't like go without a cup of tea.
No coffee?
No coffee, always a cup of
No
tea.
coffee. Okay, fair. If money didn't exist, what do you think you would do every day with your time?
Ooh, I'd still code. I still quite enjoy solving problems, so I'd still do that. Don't know what else I'd do. Maybe bake a little bit more.
I think you found your calling, Jade. I think it's probably a good sign. If you could send a single message to your former self to maybe help you transition as you've done in the past, what do you think that would be?
The same advice that I give people that I speak to. Most people who are been in this industry are just playing the confidence game. It's not it. You are valid in what you think, and if something doesn't sound right, it probably isn't.
I love that. What are your thoughts on Bitcoin?
I don't really know. I don't really care about Bitcoin to be fair.
No, fair. That's a fair answer. Are there any books or podcasts that have had a big impact on you, maybe other than the book that you had mentioned, Managing Humans?
The only other book that's had a like significant impact on me is the Working Hard, Hardly Working by Grace Beverly.
Okay, I haven't heard that one. I'll have to check it out. Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about today that we didn't?
No, I think that's everything.
All right, where
Thank
can
you
people
for having
go?
me.
Yeah, no, it's been my pleasure. Where can people go to find out more about you and to connect?
So I do have a website. I have like this shirt. Like my colleague made me a good friend. It's called Jade Codes.
I like it.
Yeah, it was really nice that they made me. So I have a website, jade-codes.dev, so you can find me on there, which has all my socials on it.
Okay.
But I'm mostly active on LinkedIn, and so if people want to like message me on there, then that's probably the best way that they're going to get to me. I don't always respond straight away. I have got quite a few people messaging me at the moment, and I've got a bit of a backlog that I need to get through. But I've just been really busy at the moment. I've had a few things on it over the last few days. I had like a careers fair thing that I needed to go to a few days ago, and I've just kind of had all my time occupied like coordinating and managing that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a great point. To anyone out there listening that's reached out to somebody like Jade in the past, just because they don't respond to you initially doesn't mean that they're blowing you off. They probably have a lot of messages that they're trying to get through. And also, I would say don't be afraid to send a courteous follow-up maybe a week after. You want to balance that and not be too aggressive and respect their time, but also understand that, we're all busy. We have full-time jobs, and it's not that people like Jade don't want to talk to you. It's that we're just trying to do the best that we can.
Yeah, and I think with the difficulty I find with messaging is like I had to be a lot more intentional and put a lot more thought into it. Whereas it's a lot easier to reply to someone like a comment or something because it's not like I don't have to like spend as much time and effort on it. So that's why it just generally takes me a bit longer to get back to people through messaging. And it's not that I haven't seen the message, it's just I have it in my backlog of things to go through.
Yeah. Well, Jade, you've got an incredible story. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing it. I would love to do this again in the future to touch base and to see how things have played out for you. So thank you.
And thank you. And I agree. It'd be great to see where you end up if you stay at LinkedIn or if you venture off anywhere else. I assume you're planning on staying at LinkedIn for the next.
Yeah, no, that's the plan. I think we had talked the other day about the recent round of layoffs. That was definitely disheartening. I was fortunate to not be included, but I had some very close colleagues that were impacted. And if nothing else, it was a good reminder that we shouldn't take anything like the jobs that we have for granted because they could go away, the next day. And so it's good to maybe not to live in fear, but to be prepared for that eventuality and to take the steps that you need to make sure that you're taking care of yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, I feel really thankful for the opportunity I've been given, and even if that were Sarah Harmon to me, it's a case of okay, well, I'm still really grateful for the experiences that I've had so far, and I feel like I'll do okay either way if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a great mindset. Jade, thank you so much. This has been amazing.
And thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you got value from today's show, please consider leaving a 5-star rating and a review on Apple or Spotify. It's a free way you can support the show and help other people just like you find the story and others like it. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow the show on whatever podcast application you use. And most importantly, if you know someone that might be interested in breaking into tech, tell them about the show.